Well, that was wonderful, wasn't it? And fortunately, in a couple of minutes, you're going to hear from a couple of the people who were featured in the video. The other day, a couple of us had an opportunity for a kind of advanced, I think I'm too close to this thing, an advanced screening of the video, and it was so lovely to see it. It was on a smaller screen then. It was kind of like not, the visuals are a bit more impressive now than they were that day, but at the same time, it was like I was really struck by the warmth from the video and the sense that there really is, even as everybody kind of goes out and does their own thing, there is a Dalhousie community that exists across the country and even beyond. And it's true, you find people who have done their MPA at Dalhousie and you have that kind of connection with them. So it's a great community to be a part of. On that note, I'm going to introduce the panelists for the next section of the evening. So I'm going to give them brief biographies here, even though each one of them, I could give them like a 45-minute biography. I'm not going to do that because you want to hear from them. You don't want to hear from me. So I'm just going to be kind of brief here. And it's going to be a really wonderful discussion. First, I'm going to introduce Langley, who's going to be the facilitator of the discussion. She is a graduate of the MPA program. So I have to admit that I am most familiar with her as a journalist and her career in journalism. And she made the switch to a public service career, or a different kind of public service career, in 2004. She is currently the clerk of the Executive Council. She's the Deputy Minister to the Office of the Premier of Nova Scotia, and she is the Public Service Commissioner. Previously, she has served as the ADM of Communications Nova Scotia, the Deputy Minister of Tourism. We're very excited to have her here with us. Also, yes. We're also very excited to have Catherine Blewett, who is the Federal Deputy Minister for the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. She has a wealth of experience in both federal and provincial public service, and so she's somebody that I would like to have a little bit of time with. And incidentally, she is also my husband's DM, which I told her a little while ago. He is in DFO as well. She is formerly the clerk of the Executive Council in Nova Scotia and Secretary to the Cabinet. She has considerable experience in the departments of finance, intergovernmental affairs, citizenship and immigration, and ACOA. And she's also a graduate of the School of Public Administration. So welcome to her, and thank you very much for being here. Sandra McKenzie is also going to be part of the panel. She is a former Deputy Minister of Labour and Advanced Education in Nova Scotia, and also Education and Early Childhood Development, and you saw her in the video as well. Some of the professors, she's also a graduate of the School of Public Administration, and some of the professors who have taught her have told me how inspiring she was as a student. This woman is a changer. She is an integrator. She is engaged. And so I'm really excited to meet you and so excited to hear from you. Thank you for being here. And as the fourth panelist, we have Paul Brown. Professor Brown is the first hire in the School of Public Administration at Dalhousie. And we have something in common. Both of us did an executive interchange with the Federal Public Service. Mine was at PCO, and Professor Brown's was at Environment Canada. I really respect Professor Brown's ability to combine theory and practice. And I think one of the strengths of a conference like this is that we bring together people who study and who test theories and who gather evidence and help us understand things in both a macro and a micro sense. And then also put yourself in the position of actually doing it, which I've learned is an incredibly humbling experience. So thank you very much to everybody for being here. I give a warm welcome to the panelists, and I'm going to turn things over to Laura to give a bit more of a start to things. Thank you.
I'm not sure where to start, if I should start there or start here, but I'll start here and say, was that not an inspiring video? And will inspire all of us, I'm sure, as our panelists share with us their wisdom and their thoughts tonight. So I'm to invite them to come and take a seat. Deputy Minister Blewett, Sandra McKenzie, former Deputy Minister and Inspirer Extraordinaire, and Dr. Brown. I'm going to make my way over. And I'm going to start with Dr. Brown this evening and just mention that the video, of course, focused on the graduates, and it didn't really talk about the thinking that went into the development and the creation of the MPA itself, or the early thinking about the values and the objectives. And I'm very curious to have you just comment for a few moments as the very first hire. What were you hopeful for in those early days when we saw some pictures of some very small classes? What was the thinking then?
I'm not really sure I could say because I wasn't part of that early period. I did what any normal person would be. I went to Paul Pross and asked him what was going on because Paul was the originator of the MPA program at Dalhousie. I was taking a master's degree at the time, and in some of my classes there were sprinkled these people looking to get an MPA degree. And they were interesting, but very, very applied in terms of a professional sense, which of course I wasn't at all. Little did I know that 4 years later, Peter O'Coin would be asking me to teach in the MPA program. And I didn't have a small class, I had 45 graduate students, all of whom were my age. So it was a pretty scary thing. But there was definitely a vision there, a vision of building up a professional public service at all levels in Canada, and separating out a master's degree in public admin from a master's degree in arts. And I think the overall vision was that if we did it right, then we could have a major impact for the good in Nova Scotia and beyond. And I think there was a unity around the vision, which has really sustained us over the years, certainly the 37 years that I've been there. It is that of a professional public service, serving people and building a better future for them.
Yeah, I would say that based on what we saw in the video and some of the testimony that was given by many of the graduates, it appears to me anyway that that vision has been realized and then some. Mm-hmm. Many of the graduates that gave us led us into their thought process, I think, said that was what made a difference for them. So I'm going to turn to the panelists, and I'll start with Sandra to say, you looked frightened for a moment. That is not right. Something I've ever seen you, a look I've never seen on your
total face.
Fake. It is a total fake. Right. But Sandra, based on your own experience and your own journey, there were some things that the MPA training at the School of Public Administration provided that really weren't talked about in the video, but I think contributed greatly to, I don't mean to speak for you, but contributed greatly to your journey. Mm-hmm. And I say that because I know you, but I'd love to invite you to elaborate on that assertion I'm making.
Okay, and then I'm going to come back to something that Paul just said, because I think it's something that we take for granted, and that is that a professional public service, we take that for granted now. But there was a time when there was not a professional public service. It wasn't a profession. It was a collection of people that were doing their best, and I'm going to come back to that in a second. But I started out in the public service as a clerk. I filed art and I worked my way up to a secretary, and then I made it into becoming a researcher. And my boss at the time, who also spotted greatness in Catherine, said to me, you need to go back to school, and sent me off. And I said to my husband at the time, I'm going to have to, it's going to take me 6 years to graduate part-time. And he said, you're going to be 36 anyway, just go. So I did it. As it turned out, it took me 8 years at night, and I had 3 kids, and everybody at the school knew me as the person that was permanently pregnant. And I had it was fantastic. But during that period of time, I just want to say that when I first started in the public service, depending on what happened on election night, every highway worker was let go the next day. And a new set of highway workers were hired. And that I went in one time and introduced, at the time as an EA to a minister to go unnamed, and said, we're going to try something called merit-based hiring. And he said to me, give me that pile in your hand. And I did, and he threw them up in the air. And he said, down they came. And he said, interview the ones that landed on the table. So the School of Public Administration introduced a professional set of a code of conduct and a set of standards that then civil servants started not only insisting on their own conduct, but then making sure that people around them also had the opportunity to be able to become part of a profession that was honorable and that served the Nova Scotians. And that happened right across the country. And the role that the School of Public Administration played in that can't be underestimated. So it is something I just wanted to comment on, because it's 41 years of progressively creating a profession that we can all be proud of.
Deputy Blewett, can I get you to share a little bit of your experience and do so, and I guess relating back to what Dr. Brown started off by saying around the vision for the MPA in the very beginning?
So I might start with an inscription that is in the wall, carved into the oak in the Federal Cabinet Room in Centre Block. And it says, "Love justice, you who are rulers of the world." And it's a quote from Solomon. When I first saw that, I think that quote goes right back to the very values that you reference. And when you think about a professional public service, what we offer to citizens, what citizens expect, and the trust that citizens have in their public service. I congratulate everybody in here who is a student for a fantastic and noble choice. And I also am going to switch quite quickly to what it can do for you, your family, your colleagues. I'm sitting I'm like in the sandwich. I'm so lucky. I'm sitting beside one of my classmates from first year. For Christ's sake, she would never stop talking. I would be the full-time student in the back trying to get a professor's attention. Sandra was on her feet, and the rest of us were doomed. It's true. The journey that you go on and the networks that you make, they will follow you as you go through your career. It's certainly true. And colleagues in the provincial public service, I see Bruce back there. People will... you may have to be killed later, too much about us sometimes. The public service, federally, provincially, there are some other avenues, though, I wouldn't mind putting on the table. I heard in the video reference to municipal governments. 2018, I think Canada's going to have a really important and significant conversation around reconciliation with Indigenous Canadians, and think of the opportunity to work in Indigenous governments. The craft of our profession transcends all of those various levels of government. It's the same tools, it's the same integrity, it's the same sense of humor, ability to network, not take yourself too seriously, and I think if you see the collection of the three of us, your ability to give your best, unvarnished, and honest advice to your ministers will stand you in good stead. I heard Ian Stewart's quote on the clip about David Stewie doing the one-page briefing note, not to be underestimated. The other course that I remember was, what will you say in an elevator? You've got 2 minutes, go. Somebody did that to me the other day. They said, I'll never get another chance. They looked like their eyes were huge. They said, I'll never get another chance. Here's my elevator pitch. And they actually said that out loud, but then went on to, here's the issue, here's what I think, here's my recommendation. Take it when you can get it. Anyway.
Very good advice. Very good advice. I'm going to switch a little bit because we started with talking about the early thinking and what the vision was, and and how it played out in various experiences. And so I want to talk about the evolution, and that's a theme here tonight. We're looking at how things have evolved over time, and I'm somewhat interested, and so I'm a little bit selfish in asking this, in the evolution of our experience within the Westminster model. And I am really wondering about your views or your comments and thoughts around how big systems thinking and the move to more holistic treatment of public policy and programming has an effect on the approach to public administration in the modern context, and what your thoughts are about that. And if I could go back to Dr. Brown to start, that would be a treat.
I think that's a really interesting question. I think what has happened in the last 10 years has changed public administration in a profound way. And there is no going back from the changes that have occurred. I think when I went on sabbatical in 1995, I was trying to get documents from the Office of Management and Budget in the United States because I was really keen on looking at alternative service delivery. And their A76 was their model, or their regulation for that. It took me 6 weeks to gain access to that document. When I came back from sabbatical, it was all online and it was available to me in about 30 seconds. And in the 20 years since, the internet has transformed the nature of public administration and the players who are involved in public administration. And we're still trying to come to grips with that, I think. It's a digital phenomenon now in a way that we could not have conceived of 20 years ago. And I think we're still trying to work through the implications of that. You can go on the internet now and have your viewpoint supported in a dozen different ways. It is only government, in my view, which has the ability to become a node of reliable information, evidence-based information. So the challenge is really out there for public servants to come to grips with the complexity of issues and the means that technology provides to handle those issues. It was happening as I was leaving public administration, the school for sure, in 2013. And I dare say if I went around the room, all of the first year and second year students would see the implication of this in their studies and in their hopes for what public service will mean for the future in terms of improving the lives of citizens.
It's a very important topic for us right now. I'll just ask you this follow-up, and then I'll go to Sandra and Catherine to say that I'm sometimes also struck by the influence of social media and social media platforms on the development of good public policy, and because it does, there is a voice there. And so I'm wondering if how those echo chambers influence how we're thinking in the public policy world, and or if it just numbs the debate because you hear so much of the same thing. So it's a conundrum for us. Can I get you to just add a bit on that before we go to your fellow panelists?
Yeah, it used to be, I think, that public servants always had to deal with the fact that ministers loved and hated the media. The media was both their biggest enemy and their biggest friend in terms of trying to get their message out. With the advent of the internet, there's a tremendous amount of noise out there. And I think it's really a challenge for public servants because they no longer have privileged access to ministers. There are all kinds of voices. And finding your way as a public servant to impress the minister with your understanding of what is required in a particular situation requires skills that are really demanding. Public service today is for people who are prepared to measure up to the challenge of living in a digital age. I see every hope to think that they will. They always have risen to the occasion, public servants, and I think they will in our time as well.
Very interesting. Catherine, I'm going to come to you next,
Sure.
and I'll come back to Sandra to say that you've been in both the federal and provincial systems, and if I go back to the question around the Westminster model and
Yeah.
the holistic view around not only how we do it in our own jurisdictions, but how we do it interjurisdictionally, and the demands that we face and the model that we're working in, and
Yeah.
I'm just wondering your views on that.
So that is an awesome question, and no surprise, the paradigm is shifting right now. One of, if you look at the Westminster system, and right now, if you looked at the role of the Senate nationally, it's playing a very different role. How we used to do Fed-Prov, it's going to be more like three-dimensional chess. So, and I'll just use that example of the Senate. So with the depoliticization of the Senate, now there isn't a lead. There's not a partisan side to the Senate. So a piece of legislation can go through the House of Commons in a very traditional way, and you would be schooled in that. But federalism is fundamentally changing when the leader in the Senate might very well change depending on the issue. Soon, we'll take a new Fisheries Act through the House of Commons, and it will go through the Senate. Well, it really depends on perhaps a senator from Atlantic Canada, perhaps an Indigenous senator with an interest in Indigenous law. It depends on areas of expertise, interest. The coalition changes depending on the legislation that's coming. So think about the agenda that's coming forward. Cannabis will come forward, fisheries, very significant. Canada's entire suite of new environmental legislation, all coming forward. How it starts and how it ends in 2018, incredibly different than it would have been in 1970. You know, the paradigm is shifting, and having a nimble public service that understands the dynamics, the constituencies, they're not just political constituencies anymore. They are communities of interest. They're citizens. They coalesce around interests less than politics. And back to your question, Laura-Lee, I think the social media and that instant technology access actually opens that up, because it's not the elites in a traditional sense. Whoever's got a smartphone, and most people can figure out more than I can.
Very good.
Yeah.
Sandra, what are your thoughts?
So the traditional Westminster model, there's going to be people in this room that can't see my hand, but the Westminster model goes like this. And big, messy problems go like this. And so trying to work in an environment where people are literally commenting on everything that you're doing constantly, with most of the time with very little information, and trying to get those vertical departments to work in a horizontal way is the challenge for the Westminster model. And I can give the example of working in education, where we know that poverty is, I would say, the largest determinant of how a child is going to do in school. And poverty is linked to interface with the justice system, health problems, and a whole series of issues that are tied to fragile families that may have interaction with the community services and others. Trying to get all of those departments to move at the same time, because that child lives in a family that experiences those things holistically, not vertically. And you're all going to have to be extremely clever in terms of how to make not only you successful in the job that you're doing, but to have developed in the experiences that you have right now, the ability to get your colleagues to work with you. That can't be underestimated. You can't go over and demand somebody in another department do something differently so that your problem is taken care of. You have to do that by persuasion, and you have to do that through horizontal work. Natalie Blanchette at the back, I think, is an expert in horizontal governance. And it's those big, messy problems, and they happen at every level of government that Catherine just named, and you're under the microscope constantly when you're through social media. It makes it more difficult, but it's incredibly rewarding. This is a calling. You've all answered a call to come into the public service, and you're up to the challenge. Just be aware that your ability to work with the people, not just beside you inside your department, but across, is what's going to make the Westminster model, which doesn't move, which is quite rigid, is actually much more responsive to the needs of Nova Scotians and Canadians.
Very good. Well, my brilliant plan was to tie this all back, starting with the vision in the beginning, some of the lived experience, some of the challenges facing us in the modern context, and tie that back to a question around what does the MPA and what does the SPA have to really be thinking about in its program offering now that allows it to still be true to its vision, because I think that is still a brilliant vision and something that we should all hold true to in this context. And so, because I've actually run out of time with this brilliant panel, I'm going to challenge you to make that part of your discussion over the evening and into the day tomorrow around what the original vision was and how we realize that given all of the changes and the evolution that has happened to bring us to this time in our lives. So I want to thank so much our brilliant panelists, Dr. Brown, who was in fact my first teacher when I did the MPA, and two of my brilliant colleagues and friends who I've learned so much from and have had the privilege of working with. They are mentors and just very brilliant public servants. So it's been a real honor to sit here this evening and to hear your views in this very short time frame.
All of that rich material that you gave us, we will be using again and again in our materials. What I wanted to just share with you is what the production did for me. I worked 35 years in public service in a lot of different departments and agencies, with NGOs and with even the private sector, but in a government relations capacity. This was incredibly affirming for me. The stories that people told me, I knew were there because I had experienced many of them myself, and I knew that all my colleagues and former colleagues and employees and that have stories that they accumulate over time about impacts that they feel that they've had and teams that they've been part of that really made a difference. So I knew those stories were there, and I was so deeply grateful to the graduates who spoke to us for the eloquent way they combined how their education, their MPA, really supported and gave them the foundational piece to inspire their career where they ultimately wanted to make a difference. So for me, it was incredibly affirming. For George, however, a long-time journalist, hardened journalist, political reporter, whose interaction with the public service over the years was confrontational at best, he had a completely different experience. Do you want to just share what?
Thanks, Laurie. Laura Lee, you probably know this quote. Comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. That's what a newspaper's supposed to do. And we're in a modern age. That's from like the 1930s from Chicago. So that's what I did. I afflicted the comfortable. And I chased cabinet ministers around with television cameras and I made them all crazy. And I had a certain lens view of public service and public servants and truth versus spin. And then you sent me out to talk to these people, and it completely changed my view. It has been quite spectacular. What I saw was diversity. I saw diversity in interests, diversity in backgrounds, diversity of opinions, diversity just in general. I talked to people who graduated in the 1970s, and I talked to people who graduated in this century. And then I saw commonality. And the commonality I kept running across was passion, care about the country and the provinces and the municipalities that these people worked and lived in. I heard a lot about merit-based hiring. I heard a lot about telling truth to power. And this probably would have had a completely different trajectory, but what I kept arguing for was, I just want to let them tell their stories. Find the best pieces, find the stuff in there. And there's 30 hours of video, and there's 18 minutes of people talking. You have such a rich story to tell. It was really quite spectacular. So thank you all.
Thanks, George. So I guess in summary, what George and I we talking about what message we wanted to leave you. We really hope that the video will inspire students, will inspire those who are going through the program now and those who are considering to go through it, to realize that a really strong educational foundation, that the trajectory that you're on will really enable you to make change that you're looking for, to have an inspiring career. We hope that this is affirming for faculty, so that you recognize the contribution you're making to the professional enhancement of the public service and to allowing these students an opportunity to realize their dream. We hope that Dalhousie and its partners, its government partners, will recognize how important this program is to the advancement of the country as a whole and will always continue to find ways to make it better. And finally, I personally wish the video grads find this a good testament to their brilliance and to the brilliance of the MPA family that we'll always, always be a part of.